Yogah Karmasu Kaushalam.
Now, stages of listening a lesson. A lesson in listening is one of the input skills. There are three main stages in a lesson in listening: pre-listening, while listening, and post-listening. Pre-listening stage. In the pre-listening stage, the learner learns about the topic, kind of language, and the vocabulary items he will come across while listening the lesson. The teacher could use visuals, topic-related discussions, prediction-oriented activities, etc. at this stage. While listening stage. In while listening stage, the learners learn to listen to the text for more than once, and each time they get clearer and newer understanding of the text. While listening could be a series of interactive tasks that involves response from the listeners. The various tasks are intended to focus or general to specific understanding. While listening to the given text, the teacher could allow the learners to raise questions and gain more clarity about the listening text. Post-listening stage. In post-listening stage, learners get a chance to exemplify their understanding of the listening text by utilizing other language skills like writing or speaking about it. The teacher should keep an eye on individual learners' progress and should make sure that it should increase understanding of the listening text. We may think of some sample tasks. At all the three stages of listening lesson, a teacher is supposed to utilize tasks fitting to the focus of the particular stage. For example, activities like listen and draw and like complete the story. Now let's talk about listener's response. Broadly speaking, the listener's responses could be divided into four categories depending upon the types of activities carried out in the class. First, no overt response. While listening to stories, songs, films, dramas, etc., the learners may not respond immediately, but we may find them enjoying listening to these lessons. This is an indication that the learners are being motivated towards the text. Second, short responses. Learners may find themselves comfortable while following instructions in tick marking, filling in the blanks, etc. They may respond to all tasks which require a short reply, but still they may or may not able to express in detail their understanding of the listening lesson. Third, longer response. This includes answering questions, note taking, paraphrasing, and translating and summarizing. It depends not only on the literal meaning, but it would depend on the understanding of implied meaning as well. Fourth, extended response. This may include activities in problem solving and interpretation, which would depend upon utilizing the comprehended material in an altogether new set of situation. The learner passes through all these stages during a lesson in listening. The frequency of exposure, quality and type of activities, etc. would affect the clarity and speed as well as motivation. Now, focused listening. While teaching listening skills, our objective is to give our students practice in particular areas of listening so that they can become better listeners. In focused listening activities, you may help students predict what they will hear by providing clues in the form of questions to answer or outlines, forms or graphs to fill in. These clues help students focus their listening and make listening practice easier. Students can also be encouraged to listen for important information rather than for every word. Testing listening comprehension. Listening comprehension can be checked in several ways, like have students take notes, ask students to prepare an outline or summary, ask a series of true or false questions based on the passage, ask students to give brief answers to the questions asked, have students fill in a grid, form or outline. For the last three methods, if our aim is to test listening skill, provide students with the task or questions before they listen to the passage. If we want to test memory or note taking as well as listening comprehension, then do not give task or question regarding the passage before they listen to it.
Many people are confused about the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is one of the traditional five senses and simply involves the ability to hear sounds through the ear. It doesn't matter whether we understand the sounds or not. But listening, on the other hand, is all about making sense of what we've heard. And our brains carry out a whole range of activities in order to do this. Firstly, our brains decide whether the sounds reaching our ears are the sounds of language. We do this by trying to match the sounds we're hearing with words we already know. Then we group them together into phrases, which helps us to clarify in our minds what the topic is that we're hearing about. Finally, we make connections between what we think we've just heard with our pre-existing knowledge of the topic, based on our knowledge of the world. This way, we develop an understanding of the overall message. So, there's a lot going on in our brains when we listen to something. And although listening is often called a receptive skill, it's certainly not a passive one. A good listening assessment should try to copy the real-life use of the language as closely as possible. For example, there'd be little point in trying to assess someone's ability to extract factual information from an announcement at a train station if the listening task itself didn't resemble train station announcements. Lots of different tasks are used in listening tests. Sometimes, test takers are asked to pick out a word from several that sound alike, or to recognize the correct grammatical tense or words connecting sentences like however or consequently. Often, the meaning of unknown words has to be deduced from context. They might be asked to listen to something and identify the main ideas to get a general understanding of what it's about, which might lead to being asked to summarize the whole topic either in writing or speech. They can also be asked to listen for specific information. Sometimes the task means that they have to make more subtle choices and work out what the speaker's attitude is to the topic by inferring or deducing what the speaker really means when it isn't clearly stated. All these tasks can be done in different ways. For example, test takers might listen to someone reading something aloud live, or they might listen to an audio recording playing through speakers or headphones. Another option is to listen to a simulated live discussion or talk either on video or via a computer. test takers might be asked to answer questions, either by choosing the best response from a number of responses, as in multiple choice tests, or in writing, either with a single word or short answer, or by writing a longer response. Of course, in the end, all these tasks have to be given marks or scores. So, it's important to decide beforehand how questions are going to be marked, and to make sure the test takers understand how their tests will be scored. One of the things that has to be decided in advance is whether each response should be given a single mark, or if some should be given more than one mark because the answer is more difficult. This is called weighting. Another important decision is whether some marks should be given if an answer is partly correct, but not totally. This is called giving partial credit. If the listening tasks require written responses, we have to decide if grammar, spelling, and punctuation mistakes should be penalized. We also have to make sure that the number of possible correct answers to open-ended questions is limited, so that marking is easy and fair to all test takers. So, to create a useful listening test, we need to think about all these things, while at the same time making sure that the test taker's listening ability is being assessed in a meaningful way. Getting all this right isn't easy, and that's why listening is often said to be the most difficult skill to test. But it's also the most widely used skill. Since we can't have any communication without understanding, so it's certainly a very important skill to test.
Now let us talk about dictation. Listening is the primary thing that is happening during dictation. In dictation, you read a short passage to students and they write it down word for word. This activity is useful for practicing basic listening skills as well as basic writing skills. It also involves reading and speaking when the learner reads aloud the passage to the class. There are several stages or steps. First, select a passage or dialogue of appropriate length. Second, introduce new or difficult words to the students before dictating the passage. You can also give some background information to make the student comfortable. This help will allow students apply top-down strategies for listening comprehension. You may increase or decrease the difficulties of the exercise by giving less or more information prior to dictating the passage. Third, when you read aloud the passage for the first time, ask students to listen to it only. Fourth, read the passage again, slow and with necessary pauses after every sentence or phrases or clauses so that students write it down word for word. All sentences should be fairly brief, no more than 7 or 8 words. If required, repeat each sentence twice or thrice. While dictating, do observe your class to find out how much difficult the passage seems to the students and then accordingly slow down and speak more clearly to make it easier, or speak more quickly and naturally to make it more difficult. Fifth, read the passage fluently without break again so that students can assess their work. Sixth, now write down the whole passage on the board so that students can evaluate their work by looking at the board, or ask volunteers to come forward and write down different lines one by one on the board, or collect the dictations from all and check them individually. Let us also discuss what dictocomp is. Dictocomp is more challenging than dictation. In dictocomp, you read the whole passage to students several times at a fairly natural pace rather than taking pause after each sentence. Thus, students are compelled to listen for and remember ideas, not just words. Choose a short passage or a dialogue. The passage might have only 5 to 10 sentences. Then set the scene of the passage for the students by introducing new or difficult words to before dictating the passage. You may also give some background information to the passage. Then ask students to listen carefully and try to remember. Then read the passage 2 times at fairly normal speed without any pause between sentences. Instruct students to jot down keywords and phrases from the passage as you read. Then read the passage a 3rd time slightly more slowly. Then ask students to try to reconstruct and write down the passage as they remember it without changing the meaning or breaching the grammatical rules. Make it clear that they need to use exactly the same words as the original passage. Then write the original passage on the board or give it to the students as a handout and have students check their work. Give your inputs and solve queries if there are any. To make a dictocomp activity more or less challenging, change the length and difficulty of the passage, read the passage fewer or more times, increase or decrease the pace, or add or remove pauses between sentences. If most of the students can write down the gist of the passage after the 3rd hearing, the level of difficulty is apt. If they get most of it after the first reading, the dictocomp is too easy. Now let us talk about stories. Stories are comparatively an easy and interesting way to give students practice listening to extended discourse. Students are fond of informal personal stories, stories from film or literature, or true historical accounts. Very easily, they get connected to the basic structure of the story. They begin to assume it further and finally, they have a successful listening experience. So first choose a story you want to tell and prepare as necessary. Then story should be told as informally and naturally as possible so that students don't take it as another tedious exercise. Many students strive to understand just because they are interested in stories. When listening to story is a listening task, you can have students respond in the following ways. Ask students to take notes and then to compose a summary or to tell the story again in their own words. Ask them to be ready to frame a comprehension question or two after you finish the story. Try to get students' opinion about the story, whether they found it worth listening or not, or what they found interesting or surprising in the story. Ask students to improve and revise the story according to their cultural norms. Leave the story incomplete and ask students to devise an ending of their own. Now let us discuss elements of basic listening activity. The basic listening comprehension activity consists of a few elements. First is text. Here text means something to listen to, for example, a story told by the teacher, a dialogue on a CD or DVD, or a TV show, readings, or lectures presented one or more times. Second, context. The real life situation presents almost all listening tasks with a context that provides clues for listeners as they try to comprehend a text. There should be some context for listening exercises by explaining the background, showing pictures, and so forth. Third is purpose. In real life, listeners often know why they are listening to something. So, it is better to let students know what they are listening for before they hear something. And fourth is task. Most listening exercises work better if they are tasks. It should be designed in a manner that students respond in some way to the material instead of mere listening to it. The task always keeps students alert and helps focus their listening. All these listening practice activities should be arranged according to the level at which they are most likely to be appropriate, starting with those of beginning level students. We can make them easier or more difficult by adjusting the vocabulary, speed of delivery, clarity of speech, depth of content, and so forth. While the activities here focus on listening practice, many also involve practice of other language skills.